Hello and welcome to this edition of Elvenhome, which concentrates entirely on the scenic work to create the memorial garden that surrounds the war memorial. The next clip that you're just about to see was actually recorded and could have been included in the previous edition of Elvenhome, but that was already getting pretty long, particularly as I wanted to show you the whole process of making the trees. So I jump back in time and then come forward to the work that I did after the last edition. So let's get on with the video, and you can see the work as I was starting to think about how I was going to lay out the gardens to surround the war memorial. Well, work has started on the building of the memorial gardens for Weathertop. You'll remember that I built this war memorial and completed it in time for the 100th anniversary of the cessation of hostilities, of the armistice, last year. And what I've always had in mind was that it would sit within a memorial garden. Now, in the last video, you will remember that the war memorial was further to the left, and in between it and the fire station, I'd put the town hall. David Kutz, in commenting, said that he thought it all looked rather squeezed in, and in doing so it just made me realise that I had indeed made a compromise there. I'd been working trying to fit the town hall and the war memorial in. I'd tried various permutations, and that was the kind of line of best fit of all the permutations I'd tried, but I wasn't happy with it really. And this is why the comments are so useful. It just took one person reminding me that that isn't what I wanted, that what I wanted was a bigger area for the memorial gardens. And that has had a kind of, bit like a pebble rolling down a hill that sort of starts a bit of a landslide, has meant that I've gone in for a slightly bigger redesign of this area, which I'll speak to in a moment. You'll see, if I zoom in a little bit, that I've started building trees. These are seafoam trees. The design is going to be that the memorial gardens is really bounded by a large hedge, which will go to the left and right and possibly to the back in front of the fencing that's been erected by the railway company, with at the back a line of trees inside, because in November 2017, whilst my wife and I were having a holiday in Paris, we took the train from Paris up to just slightly short of Boulogne, a place called Étaples, which is the largest military cemetery in France. I think about 10,500 graves. Some of them are World War II, but I think there's at least 10,000 graves that are of men that died, men and women of all nationalities that died in the First World War, and therein is interred my great-grandfather, who died in November 2017, and I thought it would be a fitting thing to go and mark the 100th anniversary of his death by visiting Étaples. But a memory that I have of Étaples, of the war cemetery, is that his grave was right towards the back, and we went towards the back, and there was a line of trees in front of a fence, and behind the fence was the main line from Boulogne to Paris. And so I thought this would be a nice memory of visiting that place, to put that onto the layout. So I've got a line of trees that will sit, I think, in front of a hedge to mask the railway. And then there'll still be the path coming slightly to the front, up the left-hand side of the fire station as an escape route. There'll still be a bigger paved area in front of the memorial where the dignitaries and everybody else can assemble on Remembrance Sunday, and that will then give me a nice big area for the gardens. That meant I had to change the position of the town hall, and you may now see, if I zoom back out again, that it is now facing the fire station. And as a consequence of thinking about that, I suddenly realised that all my troubles had come from how I'd positioned the road, and that there was no magic about the positioning of the road. I could change the position of the road, particularly the point at which it would come up from the lower level where the gasworks sit. So, and this is only this morning, so I need to live with this a bit longer. The gasworks has moved from the right-hand side to the left. It will change the road layout the other side of the viaduct. But if I settle with this, then I'll explain that in a later video. And I think what will happen is that the road will be a sharper incline through one of the other portals, one of the other arches of the viaduct, coming up pretty much opposite the left-hand side of the fire station as a T-junction. And that actually, starting to think about that, is solving problems of how I use the area, if I pan around slightly, the raised area to the left of the war memorial. What's going to happen? What's going to go in there? And I think I'll be able to make more use of it in some way or other than I have so far. So that's all I want to talk about at this stage. The next thing for me is to start finishing planning and buying the hedge, because I don't have enough hedge to complete that part. And also settling how much I just have grass around the war memorial, or I want to actually do any other kinds of features where people might be able to walk or linger. In the last video, you will have seen me talking about the layout of the memorial garden, and that I needed to buy some hedges. And I was going to go and buy the Gauge Master hedges that I used for the vicarage. I'll take a still here of the vicarage so you can get an idea of which hedges I was thinking about. And that I suddenly remembered that when I went to Model Rail Scotland, I bought a pack of rubberized horsehair, which I've seen many other modelers use. I think Dean Park has been using it actually to make small bushes. But also I remembered that Luke Towan, and if you haven't come across him as a modeler, you really do need, I mean, that is just amazing, the stuff that he does. And I remembered that he made a privet hedge, essentially, or a big hedge, using this rubberized horsehair. It comes, this one came in a pack which originally filled the whole of this, and you'll see that it's quite thick, it's quite spongy. I think it is what it says on the tin. It is horsehair that's been treated with some kind of rubber product to allow it to hold together. And what I managed to do, really rather surprisingly accurately with a pair of scissors, was to trim 2 strips off of the hair. As I said, it's quite thick, so having trimmed my 2 long strips, I then cut it in half, and that gave me 4 pieces, of which I've got 3 here, which is essentially my hedge, which is going to form round the memorial. What I will do now, using exactly the same technique as I used to make the trees, is to use fixative around this and then sprinkle. I may use leaves, I may use some flock, which I've got, it depends on the colour. This hedge will be of a more uniform colour and a darker colour, so I'm going to see if I've got a dark green so that it's different to the trees and to the grass, which will be a darkish green but not too dark. So I'm going to go and use exactly the same technique, which is just spray it with fixative, sprinkle the leaves over it until I've got a nice coverage, because you can, if you don't get enough coverage the first time with that sprinkling technique, you just spray it again and then sprinkle a few more leaves over. Maybe try some different colours just to see how it comes out with. And I'll come back once I've completed the, measure these up, because I don't want to have to cut these after I put the leaves on. And we'll see whether this works as a method. I think it should. I mean, they're already looking pretty good. I could put them on like this and say it's winter, but that would be the only part of the system that would be winter. So I'll come back once I've managed to complete the work on these to create them as hedges. Following on from the last clip, I now have firmed up on the design that I want to use for the memorial garden, remembering that this had to be fitted into an area that was once a council-owned park, which was turned into a memorial garden. I wanted the front to be pretty symmetrical, because looking on Google at UK war memorials, where there is a large structure at the centre, it's quite often flanked symmetrically by other things, whether those are memorial stones with names on, or flower beds or whatever, but it tends to be a fairly symmetrical approach, helping to draw the eye to the centre where you have the memorial structure itself. That has required me to do a certain building and also to finish doing the hedges, which I will show you in just a moment. But just very quickly to talk through, at the front I mentioned that I was going to have an area which would be different from the Metcalfe paving. These two sections here are Metcalfe paving, and just to give you an idea, that's the sort of thing that's gone in. In the centre I've used the same plastic card, or strip styrene rather, card. I don't know if you can, yes, you can see there that this is I think 2mm squares, which has been used as the base for where the market stands. I've cut a particular length of that, which gives me 8 squares either side of the central of the main memorial building. And then to either side of that there's a section of paving and a flower bed. And I've constructed the flower beds so that they sit properly against the paving. If I get one of the flower beds in here, which is very, very simply made, but this sits on a 0.5mm piece of strip styrene. If I just turn this over, as you can see, it's got a strip styrene base, and then this is 1 centimetre square, 1mm square strip styrene to provide a curb. But because it's only 1mm, I didn't want it disappearing against the paving, because this paving is about 0.5mm, so the curb wouldn't be very high. So that gives me a nice decent curb to sit at 6 inches in real money, to sit above. And then I've used the Javis earth, which I've used before. I used it in the vicarage garden, mixed with some Ballast Magic, a quick squirt of water, and that's set solidly. And then on top are some of the Pico static grass, if I bring this in, 4mm self-adhesive flower grass tufts. And you get loads in a packet, and indeed I've used them at the front of the fire station. So there's 2 of those have been made, and they will go in either side. And then behind them will be some fencing, the same fencing as I used around the play park square, little garden square that I made. And then you'll have the hedges coming all the way around. And I said I'd show you what the outcome of the hedges were. You saw in the last clip them in their raw state, and this is now the hedge in its finished state. I've used 2 colours of leaves on here. The main body of this, again using the same thing, the spray adhesive, and then a mid or dark green for the bulk of the hedge. The top has been sprinkled with a very light green, which is where you would expect the growth on the hedge to be. And it just breaks up what would otherwise be a uniform colour. And the great thing about the horsehair, as you can probably see, if I zoom in a little, I'll zoom in just a bit, is that because it's an open structure, it actually looks very real indeed. And I'm really pleased with that. And the hedging will run obviously right the way down the side. Let me come back out again because you won't be able to see if I can zoom back out. There we go. The hedging runs obviously right the way down to meet the fence that's separating the railway. It runs round a lot, not all the way round the curve, because it'd probably be a sharper turn there, but not quite 90 degrees, to come up and sit behind the left-hand side of this flower bed. So the thing for me to do now is to go and get all of that on the layout. This will all be turf. I think I may just keep it at 1mm, but give it several coats so it's a good thick sward of grass. 1mm would be 6 inches in real money, which is actually still quite deep for grass if you think about it. But if we tried to do the kind of length of grass that you would really get on a well-mown lawn, you wouldn't see it. So 1mm is the smallest they do, and I think that's enough, because if I put 2mm grass on there, you would be walking through a field of grass that stood at about 1 foot high. And most memorial gardens do not look like a hay meadow. So we'll go and get that on the layout, and then I'll show you what it looks like once it's done. And obviously these are the trees that go at the back. So I'll come back when I've completed all that work, and you can see what the memorial gardens finished looks like. Well, here you can see the finished memorial garden with the grass down and the trees planted in. If I just zoom in a little bit, which is very much what I had down on the plan, but this has taken much longer to finalise than I had expected, because of a problem that I encountered, which maybe I could have foreseen. In order to know where the grass was going, I glued everything else into place, which I think still was the right thing to do. But the problem that it gave me was that the applicator for putting the static grass, the head of the applicator, was simply too big to get low enough down to make the static grass do what I wanted. And particularly with 1mm static grass, what I ended up with was lots of very clumpy static grass, because it was just basically falling and not being made to stand up. So that all had to be scraped up. I then used some 1mm scatter to see if that would, and did a mixture of colours to see if that would work. But again, what I found was that 1mm is very fine, and the board was showing up through the scatter. And although I did several coats of trying to do it, it still wasn't really looking very good. And then I remembered something that I'd seen being used by others who didn't have one of the Pico applicators that work by static charge, which is one of these things. Let me just zoom back out again and put it into shot. Now this has Hornby Scale Scenics on it as a puffer bottle. Gauge Master do one both separately and in a pack. I think it's actually a knock product, because this is identical to the one that Gauge Master do. This cost me £6.50, and it's a very simple device. You just take the hopper out of here, and you fill the centre with static grass. There we go. Put in the nozzle, and then I gave it a bit of a shake, and then a good puff puts the static charge into the box. So and that gave me the amount of control I needed. So I first of all, go back in again, did a 1mm covering, but again it was so fine that the colour of the baseboard underneath, even with the scatter that I'd used as a kind of base, so I eventually succumbed and then did a top coat of 2mm summer grass, and that has worked really well. And so that now gives me, it is much deeper. If that was real life, this would all be a metre tall, but it's all gone down pretty well and gives me exactly what I wanted by way of a finish. So that really completes all the work on the war memorial and its memorial garden, and I can now finalise what else is going to go around there. I think opposite the garden, somewhere along there's going to be a police station. You'll remember when I had the poll on what should I put in the vacant space, a number of things came up, and a police station was one of them. So I think that may well go either next to where the town hall is, or the other side of where the road will come up. So that's really it for this edition of Elvenhome, which is concentrated entirely on this one piece of scenic work. In the next edition, I hope to actually start work properly on the hotel. I've been doing some experiments in the light of comments that are made in the last video about how I seal the card so that I can paint it and don't have to support it internally. Not all very successful at the moment, but I'll talk about that more in the next video. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and that if you haven't already subscribed, that you do subscribe. It'll be great to have you along, and hit the bell notification and enable notifications in your account so that you can know when I'm uploading. And please do let me have your comments. As I've always said, I really enjoy those. And indeed, the layout here was, as you heard earlier, as a direct result of someone commenting that what I had originally put up here was a bit cramped, and instead we have is very much what I had in mind for the memorial. So until I speak to you again, that's bye-bye from me. Bye-bye.